She first realized that this land does not belong to Europe in an air that mingled the taste of salt, diesel, and damp wood. It was late in the winter of 1944, when a group of German prisoners of war were moved from the East Coast to a camp in the American South. Erika Voss, registered as a German Army weather corporal, had maintained throughout the long transfer the posture drilled into her during training. Back straight, steps controlled, eyes not wandering. But when the prison truck stopped at the edge of a pine forest, a sweet, hot, humid air washed over her. It felt like an invisible layer of cotton pressed against the skin, making it impossible to keep the familiar sense of distance. The light in the south was different from winter in Europe. It lacked clear gradations of shadow and brightness. It seemed to fall straight from the sky, pressing every shadow until it grew pale and thin. As she stepped down, she saw the barbed wire on the perimeter of the camp glinting grayish-white in the sunlight, and the edges of the wooden guard towers were cracked from long exposure. In that moment, she truly understood. This was not an extension of the battlefield, but a completely unfamiliar rear area. The unfamiliar meant the unpredictable, and the unpredictable made her more uneasy than open hostility. The first roll call in the camp did not carry an obvious threat. The movements of the American soldiers were precise but not oppressive. They seemed to be carrying out a long-established procedure. Read names, check numbers, confirm the ranks, signal the column to enter the barracks. No insults, no extra show of force. For people who had come from the European fronts, the lack of visible tension created a new kind of tension. Erika remembered the faint smell inside the wooden barracks, a trace of disinfectant mixed with the odor of old cotton. She could not tell whether this belonged to the hygiene measures of the camp or to the lingering marks of some previous group of prisoners. She put her ration bag under the bunk and heard a Bavarian voice mutter on the neighboring bed, "At least it's not snowing." This did not fall within the range of things she felt obliged to answer. Training had taught her that on the first day as a prisoner, one did not form unnecessary social ties. There was no obvious hostility in the camp. That should have allowed people to relax, yet it made her more cautious. Military instruction had always stressed, "No explanation is more dangerous than a bad explanation." The American guards were not deliberately harsh, nor deliberately friendly. They maintained a calm, standard professional distance, as if standing along a precisely marked line. Their movements were predictable, yet lacked any emotion she could categorize. She had never before seen enemies administer prisoners in such a neutral manner, as if they were simply one entry in a large rear area system, rather than a group singled out for special treatment. After the first evening roll call, a faint, intermittent electric sound came from somewhere in the camp. It seemed to vibrate among the wooden boards, and at the same time to be swallowed by the heavy air so that only a thin residue remained. Erika thought it was some device being adjusted and paid it little mind. She was more concerned about the humidity of the southern night, the sticky damp that brought to mind the subtropical belt circulation her meteorology instructor had mentioned, though she had never experienced such a climate in person. The moisture in the air felt almost tangible, accumulating on the skin as darkness thickened. For someone used to reading the weather through data, this kind of weather felt too close to the body itself. An environment that erased the distance between observer and object tended to generate tension below the level of conscious thought. What she could not know was that the faint electric sound was only the background noise produced when the camp loudspeaker system was tested. The music had not yet begun, but the air already carried a slight sense that something is about to happen. The prisoners were not warned that records would be played. They were neither ordered to avoid the sound nor ordered to listen. The American soldiers did not explain. The prisoners had no way to inquire. The system existed as a silent boundary. Whether or not they understood it, it would operate at its fixed times. Night fell slowly. The sky faded from bright white to deep blue. Inside the barracks, shadows lengthened from clear-cut shapes into stretched strips, then merged. Erika sat on the edge of her bunk and heard from a distance the low vibration of a diesel generator. It felt like an echo of the long journey, still present. She tried to arrange in her mind the possible schedule of the next day. Roll call, assignments, counting, labor, weather recording. But the air of the American South made it hard to maintain the neat order she associated with Europe. Unfamiliar land rearranges perception, and perception changes always come before understanding. Morning roll call always started before the sun fully rose. In the early light, the southern sky appeared soft, yet the air remained moist like a thin film laid over the skin after a night of steam. As Erika sat up, her first sensation was not cold, but the touch of air that lay somewhere between warmth and stickiness. She knew the winter winds of Europe, but here there was no sharp sting of temperature difference to drive away sleep. Outside, she heard metal buckets striking the ground. At some distance, American soldiers were banging on the sides of the pails to signal the prisoners to form up, instead of using commands or whistles as German soldiers would. The metallic blows were crisp and firm, without emotion. They were simply signals that the procedure was starting. The formation of the line was not particularly neat, and the American soldiers did not seem troubled by this. They counted heads, without caring whether the line was straight or postures correct. Erika stood in the ranks, maintaining an upright spine out of habit. The sky was a pale blue with a touch of pink, and the air carried a hint of pollen that made her frown. This was neither a battlefield nor occupied territory. It was a rear area facility, administered by a system. Order that was too calm tended to make her look for clues. Breakfast was simple: a ladle of oatmeal, a piece of bread, a slice of canned fruit. The ration was not abundant, but sufficient to maintain energy. She noticed that the boxes on the serving table were marked POW RATION, with a Red Cross emblem on the side. For Europeans who had lived through shortages, this standard created a complex feeling. It was neither preferential treatment nor intentional deprivation. It represented a level intended to maintain. This level carried no warmth, but its steadiness was striking. Morning labor was assigned by category: agricultural work, camp cleaning, lumber handling. A few prisoners were assigned to assist the weather station. Erika's name appeared on that short list. It was work that required a technical foundation. The American meteorological personnel had read her record and could evidently interpret the training grades in the German file. The American weatherman did not say much. He gestured for her to follow. In the air, the smell of hot gasoline from some distant engine mixed with damp soil. She realized that on this land, every odor, soil, resin, fuel, was heavier and closer to the skin than she was used to. The weather station stood on one side of the camp, set a little apart from the main barracks, with a few tall pine trees nearby. Instruments were neatly arranged on a wooden platform. An anemometer, a simple rain gauge, thermometers, a small barometer. The American soldier handed her the record sheets and signaled her to fill in the values. She knew the instruments and how to read them, but the weather here was more difficult to anticipate than in Europe. The wind shifted constantly in the pines. Sunlight, bent in the heavy air, made distant patches of ground appear to ripple like water. Erika quickly entered working mode. She lowered her head, observed and wrote, handling each set of numbers with the calm rhythm she had developed in training. Sometimes the American weatherman glanced at what she had recorded and nodded without visible emotion. This non-interfering manner made it unclear whether she was being evaluated or simply incorporated into routine. He did not seem eager to turn her into anything beyond a specific type of labor. His silence felt more like professional habit than deliberate distance. They are not watching us, she thought. They are watching their procedure. By noon, the sun had climbed, and the humidity pressed toward an irritable level. The smell of pine resin thickened with the heat, rising like vapor from the ground. The rotating cups of the anemometer flashed faintly white in the harsh light, like a metal insect repeating the same gesture. Thunder rolled in the distance, suggesting that afternoon storms might form. Thunderstorms in the American South were not like those in Europe. The clouds were piled thick like cotton, yet within minutes the temperature could rise sharply, making the air heavy. After lunch, the camp allowed a short free period, but only within the area between barracks and yard. Many prisoners chose the shade. Some mended clothing, some cleaned boots, some simply leaned against posts with their eyes shut. Erika sat on the ground outside the barracks, watching how wind lifted small particles of dust. This was her habit, judging the trend of the weather by visible changes. In wartime, German weather personnel had not only recorded data but also extrapolated from long experience. Here, the environment interfered with her judgment. Temperature, humidity, wind direction all seemed more variable than in the theaters she had known. The data are fixed, she noted inwardly, but people must first adapt to the environment before they can trust what they see. Afternoon labor ended slightly later. The American soldiers gathered the prisoners with the same calm professionalism, neither more nor less strict. As the sky darkened, the faint electric noise rose once more, clearer than in earlier days. In the humid air, the sound carried a slight vibration and bounced between the wooden buildings like a damp rope being drawn tight. Prisoners reacted differently. Some looked up in annoyance, some assumed it was only the generator, some ignored it altogether. The American soldiers said nothing. As the sun dropped below the horizon, the air grew heavier. On her way back to the barracks, Erika noticed a small loudspeaker at one corner of the camp. It was covered by a wooden frame, its metal grille stained by time. As she passed, the electric hum rose sharply at close range, then was lowered again, leaving only a low background noise. No one told her what the device was, and no sign indicated whether prisoners could approach or should stay away. The American system seemed not to rely on prohibitions to mark its boundaries. Instead, it set objects in place and left them in plain sight. This combination of visible clarity and invisible rules made it hard for her to reduce the camp's behavior to any known pattern. When the lamps were lit and dusk settled, the camp entered another kind of quiet. Sitting on her bunk, Erika realized that she had been noticing the electric hum without meaning to for several nights. It was not a command and not a warning. It was simply there, a signal before clarity. She did not know what it meant, but the intuition formed by her work as a weather observer suggested a periodic sound usually means a man-made rhythm. Rhythm implied a system. A system implied something long-term and repetitive. Gradually, she understood that this was not a malfunction, but a part of some routine. But what routine? For what purpose? Did it involve the prisoners? Was it a form of management? She did not know. Yet the questions had been forced on her. From a certain day onward, the recurring electric noise changed. After afternoon roll call, it lengthened, as if testing the loudspeaker or serving as the prelude to a regular procedure. The prisoners noticed, but no one knew why. The Americans remained silent. They checked the broadcast area more often, but gave no explanation. One day, as Erika returned from the weather station, she heard a faint beat mixed into the electric sound. It was not yet music. It sounded like the friction of a needle on a rough record. She paused for half a second, and then walked on. The pause was not interest, but a trained reflex to catch unusual signals. The afternoon air was still humid. The heated pine smell had grown thick, almost like some ointment. While recording the day's readings, Erika noticed that the mercury dropped more slowly than usual, meaning that evening temperatures would fall more gradually and humidity would stay high. She tried to keep her attention on the weather and not let the altered sound intrude. But when she closed her notebook and turned to leave, a sound not belonging to nature reached her from the yard. A beginning of melody. It was a very short piano chord sequence, broken by the wear on the record, like wooden slats joined again after being split. Then brass entered. The tone was bright, but weakened by the metal grill, reduced to a thin, shining surface. Erika assumed at first that this was psychological warfare. During the war, she had heard German units use music from loudspeakers, mixed with slogans and commands. That music had goals: to stir, to inflame, to direct. This beginning felt different. No stated goal, no emotional instruction, no context. It simply started. Reactions in the camp varied. Some prisoners lifted their heads, some frowned, some laughed and said it was a new trick from the Americans. The American soldiers did not act like men running a propaganda operation. They stayed where they were, sometimes glancing at their watches, maintaining vigilance and nothing more. No one ordered the prisoners to listen. No one told them to disperse. There were no ropes around the broadcast area, no special markings. The sound was played as if it were only a procedure. For Erika, the absence of explanation was the most disturbing part. She tried to find a logic. Was this a management method, a program for the guards, an error, a routine from the American rear? She had no answer. Without an answer, she could not build a defense. Life in a prison camp was spent seeking patterns that could be understood, and this piece of music did not fit into any known pattern. The air's humidity slowed the spread of sound. The music moved more slowly than one would expect across the camp. The dampness weighed the notes down as if they were pressing through a thin layer of water. Between the barracks, the sound reflected and flattened, leaving a neutral brightness. On her way back from the weather station, Erika listened to the melody extend like a thin line. It neither aroused nor narrated. It simply continued. She tried to return her attention to weather. The southern climate followed its own rule: stable in the morning, increasing humidity in the afternoon, electrical build-up before evening cooling. But this music had become an extra variable. It did not belong to the natural system and yet altered how people experienced the environment. She disliked variables that could not be explained. The record kept playing, and a fragment of singing emerged from the loudspeaker. The limited quality of the 78 RPM disc and worn grooves added a sandy hiss, as if someone was speaking in wind. The lyrics were eroded and vague. She could hear the rhythm of English, but not the meaning. Around her, prisoners whispered. One said the song was from New York, another said it came from a radio program. Another claimed it was meant to show that life in the American rear goes on. Each explanation seemed reasonable, but did not fully match the situation. The American guards neither confirmed nor denied anything. They remained at the edge of the yard, letting the music carry on. It was then that Erika realized for the first time that the culture of the enemy could appear without hostility. It was not a weapon, a slogan, or a command, but an ordinary public resource. She could not use any part of her training to classify it. The next day, the music sounded again at the same hour. This time, she did not try as hard to ignore it. She listened for patterns instead. The fixed start time, the characteristic opening burst of static, the standard volume level, the same pause between records. The Americans seemed to be carrying out a standard routine, not targeting the prisoners. The neutrality made it hard to assign meaning. If this is not for us, she thought, for whom is it? She looked at the guards' faces but still saw only professional stillness. A few days later, she saw the record itself. Returning from the weather station, she passed near the broadcast equipment and saw a soldier carefully wiping a black disc. The edge of the record reflected a weak gleam. The center label bore a company logo and 78 RPM. She recognized the opening notes of a familiar tune as the disc was placed on the turntable. When the needle dropped, a clearer static rose. There were no special guards, no covers, no signs declaring the area off limits. It was not a secret installation, not a psychological warfare post, just an ordinary device placed in a prison camp. This plainness complicated matters. If it was ordinary, it was background, not a weapon, daily routine, not a command, something not designed for the prisoners, but simply there. She remembered a sentence from her days in meteorological training. The most dangerous phenomena are the ones without names. The music now fell into that category for her. As time passed, the prisoners adjusted to the music, or at least reacted to it in their own ways. Some listened, some turned away, some still grumbled. The music produced no obvious change, but it was never fully absent from awareness. It was not a necessity, but not just noise. Not a benefit, but not a punishment. It resembled a certain level of humidity, present at a particular time, altering the feel of the space. Unconsciously, Erika started to track the rhythms. She did not go closer, but during weather recording, a bar of music or a certain tempo would lodge in her hearing. She remembered one day when, as the anemometer spun, a brass line in the distance held a sustained tone. For a brief moment, the turning cups and the held note matched. In that instant, she forgot that she was in a prison camp and forgot the color of her uniform. Sound had once drawn the clearest line between us and them. Now it moved through the air without clearly belonging to either side. Gradually, she realized that she had begun to observe the music. She did so as she observed weather, noting when it began, how long it lasted, how it changed. But music was not like weather. It did not follow natural law, nor submit to military regulation. It suggested a new possibility. Some phenomena were not aimed at anyone and did not serve any institution. They simply existed. For someone shaped by the European front, this was a powerful unfamiliarity. She was used to giving each phenomenon a place: enemy, ally, neutral, purpose, method, consequence. The music did not fit any place, and thus drew more attention than hostility would have done. It did not urge action, but it halted the ready-made movements of thought. During this time, the air in the camp carried small changes that were difficult to name. Humidity rose at dusk. Storms might come at night. Pine smell peaked at noon. The music appeared an hour after sunset. It did not disturb the timetable nor reshape the rules. It added another dimension of sound, spreading lightly over the daily fragments of life. Erika began to understand that the force of culture lay not in persuading, but in merely being there. It did not change the war as a weapon might. It did not shape people as training did. It worked quietly, leaving marks where no one had thought to build defenses. One can stay firm in war, but few can keep themselves completely closed in the face of sounds without explanation, intention, or orders. That week, the weather turned particularly unstable. Clouds hung lower than usual in the afternoon. Wind swirled over the camp as if moved by an unseen hand. At the weather station, Erika saw the barometer needle flicker several times in a short span. It was not a defect, but a sign of a coming storm. When she handed her report to the American weatherman, he nodded, as though he already knew a thunderstorm was approaching. The sky in the American South took on a deep grey-blue thickness before heavy rain, making the light feel as if it had been pressed down to the ground. The air grew heavy. Breathing took effort. She was assigned to stay at the station a little longer to record the changes just before the rain. On the wooden platform, she watched the distant pines move in the wind, producing a low rubbing sound. Thunder rolled from far away, dragged out over a long space. At the same time, she heard the familiar electric sound from the other side of the camp. Broadcasting time was near. She should have ignored it, but in the dense, wet air it was more pronounced. Humidity magnified all vibrations, making the sound fall heavily on the ears. Just before the rain, the wind tightened. She secured the clipboard and prepared to leave. The weatherman signaled that she could go. Walking down the steps, she felt the wind blow from the side, carrying moisture and the smell of pine. No drops had yet fallen, but in the air there was already the metallic smell of rain that long work in weather had taught her to recognize, a sign pressed down by pressure before the water arrived. On the path back to the barracks, the music began. It was not bright and not cheerful. It was a melody that unfolded slowly. The opening piano, filtered by damp air, lost its edges. Brass sounded wrapped, as if covered by cloth. The piece differed from those of earlier days, lower in pitch, the tempo held back. Erika intended to quicken her pace and leave the wind, but she slowed for a moment. That pause was not to listen, but a bodily response. At the instant when the music rose, the wind swept from her left, carrying the sound with it and making it clearer. She did not stop or step closer. She only walked a little more slowly for a few seconds. The music echoed between the wooden barracks as though seeking a way out. The stillness before the rain made every sound stand out. The melody had no fanfare and no dramatic development. It neither urged nor signaled anything. It simply continued. In those seconds, she realized that the music was neither aimed nor exclusive. It was not for the prisoners, nor for the guards. It did not exist for any specific group. It was part of a system in the rear, continuing in this place. She happened only to be within its range. Thunder came closer. She looked up. The clouds were low, almost covering the camp. The air cooled slightly. The rain seemed ready to fall. She walked on. Her steps regained their rhythm, but the short pause had left a trace. It was not a shock and not an awakening, only a small shift in some internal structure. When she reached the barracks, the first drops hit the metal edge of the roof with a clear sound. The music still played. Static and rain combined, pushing the melody distant and indistinct. Sitting on the bunk, she laid the damp record sheets on the wooden box and listened as the rain thickened. The storm had arrived. The air grew cooler. She did not consciously dwell on her pause, but when she turned the record paper, she saw that beside the weather data, she had unconsciously drawn a small sign, like a beat mark. It was not a melody, just a tiny, almost invisible double stroke. She stared at it briefly, not knowing why she had made it. It did not belong to the record and was not required by any rule. It had appeared, as if on its own. She folded the paper and turned off the light. Outside, rain and music merged. Under the storm, the loudspeaker faded in and out behind water and wind. The music floated like a weak glimmer in the mist, neither bright nor gone. That night, she understood something deeper. Not about culture or enemies, but about a basic fact. Some sounds are neither threat nor comfort. They exist in ways that do not fit any prepared category. Such existence opens small gaps in the mental framework formed by training. These gaps do not make a person change belief, nor do they erase the war. They allow a person briefly to perceive that the world does not fully run on military logic. After the rain, the air became unusually clear. Storms in the south arrived suddenly and violently, but ended by washing the sky. In the morning, even the fine branches of the pines stood out clearly in the light. Roll call the next day began as usual. There was no delay, no change because of the weather. The Americans continued to read the names and numbers. The prisoners answered in sequence. The system of music also continued to operate at its regular time. Erika noticed that her way of encountering the music had changed. She did not move closer, but she no longer rushed away. Before, when the record started, she would cross the yard quickly, concentrating on her steps and breath to maintain a sort of discipline. After the storm, her steps no longer forced themselves into uniform rhythm. When she heard the opening static, she allowed her gaze to shift very slightly toward the loudspeaker. She still kept her distance and her soldier's restraint, but she accepted that the music would pass by her. Each session was short, only minutes long, but like temperature, the music seeped into the camp's air. The prisoners' attitudes moved from curiosity to habit. Some took the music as a sign that the day was ending, some as proof that the outside world still existed. The American soldiers remained neutral, not explaining and not emphasizing. The music became the only sound in that space that did not move anything. It did not aid control and did not disturb the routine. It was a system that released sound and then stopped. At the weather station, Erika's record sheets showed marks that had nothing to do with weather, short strokes suggesting rhythm, fragments like incomplete notes. She did not try to memorize tunes or understand emotion. She simply extended her habit of observing and recording. People often mark phenomena that recur without explanation. One evening, leaving the weather station, she saw a guard remove a record from the machine. The edge of the disc had grown dull from use. The label bore a company name and numbers. She knew nothing of these companies or where the tunes came from, but she noticed a small crack at the edge held together by a strip of paper tape. It meant the record was not newly delivered nor made for the prisoners. It belonged to a larger rear world, to homes, to shops, to broadcasts. These records had their own lifetime, wear, and small repairs. None of that was directly about the war. For the first time, she understood that the music was not present because the prisoners were there. It was present because music already existed in American life, and the camp lay inside its ordinary path. Her position was passive. Sometimes passivity reshaped a person more than hostility. By early 1945, news of the war reached the camp in fragments, scraps of newspaper, stray words from guards, occasional hints in numbers. The European front shrank rapidly. Hopes in the rear and collapse at the front mingled in the air. Some prisoners began to talk about the future, about going home, about towns perhaps already gone. The music continued at its usual time, a rhythm not tied to the war, keeping its own stability upon the shifting events. Erika thought less and less about meaning. She no longer saw the music as psychological warfare or as management. She treated it as part of the environment, like temperature, humidity, wind direction, variable from day to day, yet belonging to a larger pattern. She could tell from a few bars whether the record turned slightly faster, whether the volume was lower, whether the static was heavier than the day before. These were observations, not emotions, but observations slowly changed her angle of view. One evening, she stood outside the barracks with the day's weather record in her hand. A brisk piece began to play. The piano notes were clear in the air. She stood in the shadows for a few seconds, as if waiting for the wind to shift, and watched how the sound crossed the open spaces. Some prisoners talked, some washed, some sat without moving. No one was guided by the music, and no one was stopped by it. It simply passed through. In those seconds, she realized something simple and fundamental. The music's function here was not to change anyone, but to show that the world was not made of war alone. This was not a revelation, but a fact that had settled slowly as she observed. When repatriation began, Erika stood by the transport truck, holding the small bundle given by the Americans. The camp lay behind her. The loudspeaker hung quiet in its frame, like a tired machine still capable of running. There was no music that day. The evacuation procedures took priority. The system of playback did not need to operate. She realized that she would remember the tunes, but not their full melodies. Remember the static, but not the words. Remember how the sound once floated in humid air, but not be able to fully describe the tone. It was not because the music itself was important, but because it had opened a position in her mind that had not existed before. The position of an observer not defined by uniform or enemy status. In the post-war wind, European ground felt fragmented. Streets in her hometown had been bombed, bridges were broken. The air carried a bitter dust. Returning to this damaged world, Erika found she carried an outside angle that was hard to name. She saw people repairing roofs in the ruins. She heard local tunes played on surviving instruments. Those sounds were completely different from the records in the southern camp, yet they all belonged to life. Not commands, not gestures of loyalty, but things not centered on war. War builds frameworks. Life loosens them in unexpected places. People do not often change at the sound of guns. They change slowly, where guns are absent. Erika remembered her time in the American South not because of the regulations, nor because of the music as such, but because there she first heard sounds that did not belong to any side. These sounds forced her to admit that some things require no identity, no purpose, no command. They only need to be heard for someone to reconsider the shape of the world. And such reconsideration is often where peace begins.